This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the generative AI assistant that can securely understand your business data, summarize results, and streamline tasks. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
Good morning, guys, and welcome to the podcast. Happy holidays. I'm really delighted about today's guest. And if you could have a guest who had a distinguished career in the entertainment and communications sectors and significant achievements in TV, film, radio, digital technology. And today I'm really happy to have such a guest, Bill Barnett. He's going to talk about overarching concepts, strengths, passions, rented versus own money. And it's really going to be a fascinating discussion. I'm really happy to have Bill on the show. So welcome, Bill.
Chris, it's good to be with you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Briefly introduce yourself, and I'm really excited to dive into the conversation.
My name is Bill Barnett. As you said, I've been involved with a lot of different things in my life. I guess you could say I am truly an entrepreneur at heart. I think the one thing that I am most excited about every day is that I don't know what that day is going to bring. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next week. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next year. I've had several different turns and twists in my career. Most of the businesses, which I'm sure we'll talk about, that I've got involved with, I didn't know a lot about before I got into them, but I saw a need. And based on my book, Smarter Minds, Recruit and Leverage Others for Sustainable Success, I always rely on people smarter than me to walk me through the way. And that's how I've built my businesses, and more than happy to explore all the businesses and everything that I've done with you.
Yeah, I love that intro. And I'm a serial entrepreneur at heart. Until recently, I did not embrace that idea because I always consider entrepreneurs like dropouts or just unemployed, but actually unemployed is actually a good thing because you can control your time and your income and your future. To start off with, what I really have interesting is you have these ideas of episode titles, and it's interesting. You have rented money versus owned money. What is that?
So rented money, and I think if people can grasp this, it'll really help their financial freedom later on in life. I'm obviously older than you. And if I would have I'm glad I grasped it at the age I did, but if I would have done it earlier, I would be in better shape even than I am now. So rented money is the money that you make basically in salary. So when you have a job and you're making $50,000 a year, $100,000 a year, most of that money goes towards things that are in and out, your clothes, your food, your rent. What I try to help younger people with, and even people older, is that you've got to siphon as much of that money off as you possibly can to move from your rented money bucket to your owned money bucket. If you lose your job, you lose your rented money, you lose your cash flow. But if you are smart enough, young enough to be able to move that to your own money, you can live off the interest, off the dividends, off the benefit of that. Nobody can touch your own money. Your rented money could vanish overnight. So the key is to move as much of your rented money. If you're making, I'm making up a number here, $6,000 a month, try to spend obviously within your means, but as little as possible to take as much money of that $6,000 bucket to move it to your owned money bucket. That's the money that will carry you on throughout your life. And God forbid you lose your job, you decide to quit, something happens, you've got a bucket of money to rely on. That's your owned money.
Mm-hmm. It was some of the best advice because I was talking to in my early 20s in 2002. I was exactly talking about this because I grew up around a cohort of all my classmates were going to be doctors, and my friends and colleagues were lawyers and stockbrokers and things like that. And the best advice he gave me was take that earned income and put it into assets. And I talked to so many rich, wealthy people. They were always putting it in equities, real estate, businesses. So that's some of the best advice I ever got in my entire life. You know, a lot of the audience, they're high income earners and they're like, yeah, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'll never lose my job. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, you never know what's going to happen. I can give you a couple of examples. I had one person that I knew. He was a doctor. He was doing very well.
Mm.
And unfortunately, he got sick and he could no longer be a doctor, even though he was a great doctor. And so he lost his income. And so you never know. I plan for a rainy day no matter what happens. I could have a business that's thriving, that's doing great, that I say great. You never know what tomorrow is going to bring. So start planning for tomorrow right away. Start planning for it yesterday. I was in a position where as I got older, I started putting so much money towards my owned money, my real estate, my investments, my equities, all of that stuff, that I knew that when I got to be a certain age, God forbid anything happened, I could rely on the interest income, the dividend income from that money. And then I want to just go back to something you said about that you always thought you're going to have your income, and wealthy people put their money towards investments. What I always do, a rule of thumb, is what you're buying going to be worth more tomorrow or less tomorrow than it is today. So when you go out and spend a lot of money on a meal or an expensive car or a pair of pants or a shirt, that money, that's going to devalue tomorrow. But if you put that money in a index fund or in a bond, you are almost guaranteed it will be worth more tomorrow and more next year than it is today.
Yeah, I love that. The next thing because I'm always examining just contrasting views, and you talk about spending is the key to retirement. Talk about that. I'm very curious.
Yeah, I like to say spend if you want to become wealthy. And it goes back to what I said before. I remember when my kids are now in their early 30s, and they started working at a very young age. My wife and I are both workaholics. She has an event business. She was an event producer, and I've always had my own company. So we work like crazy. And I told my kids when they were younger to make sure that you open that bank account, start saving right away. And they said, Dad, you know what? We're starting to make some money. I've got like 300. They're like 10 years old. I've got 300. I want to spend some money on things. I said, terrific. Let's do that. What do you like? Well, we like going to the movies. We like buying clothes. I said, terrific. What movie do you like? And they gave me a movie. I said, that's Disney. Okay, let's take that money. I will pay for your movie and you invest in Disney stock. And you like those clothes? Who are they made by? XYZ company. Terrific. Let's buy stock in that company. So that's how they grew up. Okay, I like this company. I'm investing in them. Now, of course, it's all about index funds, which is terrific. And I recommend that highly. But when they were younger, index funds weren't so big. So spend on things that are going to be worth more tomorrow than they are today.
Like mine, like you, I really resonate with your thinking. Again, another mentor of mine. He said, become an owner, don't be a consumer. And I did the same thing with Tesla. I bought a bunch of Tesla stock and I let it appreciate, and I use those proceeds to buy a car. So if you have this mindset, it's versus just leasing it or letting it depreciate. I really love that. Moving
One step
on
further on the car, though, make sure if you're buying a car is a terrible depreciating. I talked about this. In fact, I have several clients right now, and one of them, I spoke at USC last week, and one of them said he was right on the verge, literally going the next day to buy a car. And he says he completely changed his mindset after he heard my talk. He says, I still need a car, but I'm thinking about a completely different car now. He says, I'm going to buy one that's a year or two old. I'm going to save $30,000 on that car. And I'm taking the other $30,000 I was going to spend, I'm putting in an index fund. I applauded that person.
Yeah. And personally, if I didn't need to own a car, I would never own a car. I think it's a waste of money. We need to upgrade our transportation system, but that's a different discussion.
Whole different story.
So the other one thing I think is because there's always this old mantra of work hard, which we all should do, save, which we do, invest. That's great. But you talk about why B students are more successful than A students in the long run.
Yeah. So I'm a huge believer in this. I was in a fraternity at USC, and I'm still very close with at least 30 of my fraternity brothers. And I've seen how their careers went. And I have a few friends that were very good students. They were straight A students. They studied all that. Only one or two of those people turned out to be very successful. The rest of them have very mid-level jobs. And the reason is, and this is my biggest preach in life, is to be able to rely and trust other people who are smarter than you. A students tend to rely on themselves much more than B students. I always was a B student. So I always knew that before I did anything, literally any investment, anything I did, I would make a few phone calls. And I would call my friends that I knew were more experienced or had more expertise in certain areas, because I didn't have that pride of ownership. I was never that smart to be able to rely on myself. So my great gift is being able to pick out my friends that are really good in certain areas. And that's why I think B students say, look, I don't need to be the smartest person in the room, but I need to rely on the smartest people in the room. And that's what they did. So I love hiring B students. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such an oxymoron, because same thing is like a lot of my colleagues, they were just average med students. And they had a really great business mind. And I was telling my friend the other day over lunch, I know a lot of super smart doctors that are poor, but I know a lot of okay doctors that are super rich because of this concept, which brings me to my next question is, because in this day and age, you talk about network is your net worth and how professionals can effectively leverage their networks to build sustainable success.
Right. So there's a lot to that. I've had several businesses, and I'm going to give you an example of something that happened to me in a 3-year span. And I know that you were very involved with the SATs. You knew a lot about that. I sold one of my companies to a company called ETS. And ETS is the company that runs the SAT and the GRE and the TOEFL and the TOEIC. And that company was a company out of need. My kids were going to college, and I told them to interview. I said, I think you'll get into the schools you really want if you do it. I couldn't believe how difficult it was to get an interview. Either the schools didn't have the manpower, or most kids, we were in a fortunate position, but most kids can't afford to fly to USC or Michigan or Stanford on a day's notice. So I'm saying, what about all these kids that can't afford to fly to these schools? So I came up with a platform. I developed a platform called Live, where kids could upload an interview online, just like we're talking now, answer all the questions of the school, and it would attach to all their files. By the time we sold this company and I had left the business, we had 150 schools signed up to do this. That was a great exit, and it was a fantastic experience. But in that period of time, I also had real estate investments, and I invested in another company, and all exited within 3 years. And I did, even though I was very proud of what I did with Live, I did twice as well on my other investments as I did on that. So the fact that I was diversified, and the fact that I had other things going on in my life because I knew other people, I relied on my network to help build my net worth. And so you don't have to limit yourself. And we talk about A students, and I noticed with a lot of my friends that are A students, they're very myopic in what they do. I am not myopic. My friends always joke that I have 6 or 8 balls in the air at any given time, partly because I just don't have the patience, for one thing, but second, because I love it. I love the thrill of new things. So the bigger your network, the more opportunities that you have, and the more opportunities that you have, the better chance for success.
Yeah, which brings me to my next question is, in this day and age, because I see the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha cohort, and a lot of them are starting to question this concept of jobs. Elon Musk said in the future, jobs are going to be optional. And do you think in this day and age, it's going to be risky to go to school, like to get a degree and to get a job, versus becoming an entrepreneur? Because 10 years ago, if you quit your job, everybody thought you were crazy. But now it's like commonplace, and people look down on people that have jobs, and they think that going to school for 4, 8, 12 years is ridiculous. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I talk about this, and I was just at SC last week and talking, and I probably said a few things that were not in favor of the professors that were teaching it, although they understood it. And there's 2 sides to what you said. One is the debt that you accrue when you're in college. Mm-hmm. And if you go to an expensive private school, it's there's a lot of debt there. And yeah. I do think that you do need an expertise. You need to have what I call a leverageable asset. If you have a leverageable asset, that gives you entry into another term I use is your personal board of directors. That's your entry point into your personal board of directors. As long as you have that network where people are always thinking and coming up with new ideas, and you are flexible, and I'm a very curious person. I'm always wanting to learn about new businesses. There'll always be a place for you in this world. And so for me, it's the idea that, are you flexible? Are you curious? And do you have the network? That will build your success. In today's world, again, my kids are in their early 30s. They're unusual today. One has been in her job for 9 years, and the other one has only had 3 jobs over a 12-year span. So they are not risk takers like their father. They need something that's reliable. They need something where they're going to get their steady income. Not everybody is like me. Not everybody's an entrepreneur. So there is going to be a place in this world for people that want the slow and steady course, which is totally fine. As long as you know how to leverage that to more income and to saving and investing as much of that money as possible, you will be in good shape.
Mm. In talking about that, because stability, and we have this oncoming train that's going to cause a lot of change, which is artificial intelligence. And where do you see artificial intelligence falling into this, and how can people position themselves and adapt to this oncoming change?
Yeah, I was saying that a change is neither good nor bad. It is inevitable. So people have to learn how, and I got to tell you, I get as frustrated as anybody with change, probably more than my kids' age, because they just know it's going to happen. But I'm so used to the way something works. I'm not as smart as my kids are when I have to make these changes, and it takes me a little while to adapt. But the key for me is be patient, be calm. You're going to learn. It may take you a little longer than a 30-year-old, but so you have to be able to accept the fact that change is going to be happening. For example, I write a lot. I'm on podcasts all the time. I do a lot of different things. I love ChatGPT now. I'm used to it. I use it almost every single day. And so I do think it's going to be a major cultural change. But my father died several years ago, but it would have been the anniversary of his 100th birthday this past weekend. Yeah. And we were sitting around talking about my father, and we said, there's been a lot of change in the last 100 years, a lot. But we will be changing more in the next 10 years than we did in the last 100 years. So change is not only inevitable, but it's happening faster and faster. The people that know how to adapt to that change are the people that will be the winners at the end of the day.
Yeah. And along those same lines, because what's interesting is I love your passion. I can tell you're an entrepreneur. And so there's this thing in entrepreneurship. It's you hustle, you pound the pavement. Sometimes you're like one step shy of success. And if you keep going, you could hit that IPO or that exit or that seed round or that funding. But then there's times when it's like, you got to call it in, throw in the chips, take your profits, and then move on. What are some key indicators that suggest it's time to pivot or change? You don't want to miss that kind of that what I think Earl Nightingale was like, that one step shy of success. How do you determine when it's time to quit or stay in?
I love that you knew who Earl Nightingale was. That's very impressive. I used to listen to him when I was younger. I love that. Yeah. So I think that people have to be, again, this is part of where your board of directors comes in. I have a good friend that had a business that we talked about it every day for 3 years, 4 years. At a certain point, I said, Bob, you've been doing this for 4 years. You have not made near the progress that you think that you should have made at this point. You're still raising money. I said, I got to tell you, I would cut bait right now. I think every entrepreneur has to have the ability to know, when do I keep going? Am I on the right track? Or have I hit a brick wall and I've got to make a move? And I've been on both sides of that fence. And I had a couple companies that did not do well. And I knew in my heart, part of it was those late night talks with my wife in bed. And we both came to the realization that these companies are not going to happen. On the other hand, fortunately, I have an unbelievable wife who has a great understanding of me and how things work. And there were times on other businesses, like Live, for example, where we were just about to go broke. We were just about to go broke. And a company, ETS, came in and said, we want to buy 20%. And during those negotiations, it went from 20 to 51 to 100%. And they bought the entire company. So there is a fine line there. But that's the reason you need to communicate and talk with people in related industries and even unrelated industries. And you've got to trust the people around you. Yeah. And so you've just got to figure it out on your own. It's a feel out process, but you've got to figure it out on your own. Yeah. And along another question I have for you is, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they start out, like in my 20s, I was singularly focused on business, finance, and career. I didn't want any distractions. But like in my 30s, I'm like, if you can find a partner or
your soulmate, and you mentioned your wife. So how do you, when is it time for an entrepreneur to say, okay, singularly focus on his company or his or her company, their fitness, their health? And then when is it time to bring on a partner? How do you avoid getting distracted? Make sure your partner is supportive as opposed to pulling you away. What are some key things to look out for?
So I've always had two partners in my life, my wife and whoever my business partner was. And fortunately, everybody, I'm open about everything. All my friends, whether they're women or men, and my wife, we're all in the same group. We're all in it together. I think that when you are starting a business, you can't help but be fully enveloped in whatever that is. But for me, it was the responsibility of knowing that I had anywhere from 3 or 4 to 30 or 40 people under my guidance. And I knew that I was not just having to pay all those bills for myself and support. I was supporting up to 30 families at a time. So I knew that if these people were relying on me, I want to give them something to rely on. I had to be focused. I had to be diligent. I had to be smart. And I had to make sure we were making all the right decisions. So an entrepreneur knows, they know in their blood, in their heart, in their soul, that they've got a responsibility to make this company successful. And when we were doing Like Live, I gave everything I had to that company for 5 or 6 years, actually ended up being closer to 7 or 8 years while that company was going strong. Everything I had was involved in that company. Now, I will tell you that the company that I had before was called Radio Oz. It was a little single radio station in Minneapolis, and it was only kids radio station in the world. And the person that owned it said, I want to turn this into a network. I know you've got network experience. Can you come in and run it? And I did. And we eventually sold it and became Radio Disney. So I did that. But I have to tell you something. I was blessed with that, a good and a bad. I was traveling a lot. I live in LA. The company was in Minneapolis. But my kids, it was a kids radio station. I got them to come to all the concerts. We shared some incredible experiences together. So it was good timing because my kids got to see what I did and they appreciated, my gosh, my dad's in the kids radio business. We love it. And they told all their friends. It was fabulous. But there is a time in your life that, especially when you're young, when you're building a business, that you got to commit yourself to building that company up. And you just know it. An entrepreneur knows it.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
The holidays are back at Starbucks, and there's so much to share. With classics like Caramel Brulee Latte, Peppermint Mocha, and Chestnut Praline Latte, we're celebrating everyone's flavor of festivity. Order yours in the app.
Yeah. It's we can share stories. It's just I was talking to another colleague. He recently got married, but he was also single. Like for 20 years, he was just single and just singularly focused, and anything that distracted him, he just cut off right away because he just knew the importance of what he was doing. The next question I have for you is...
Let me just say something about that. I will tell you, I would not have been as near successful as I have been if it wasn't for my wife.
Yeah.
There's just not a chance. I know I have several friends, not a lot, several, that have been either divorced or have been single their entire career, and they've done very well. But when I say successful, not just financially, not just business-wise, but in my life, I would not have been near as successful or fulfilled if it wasn't for my wife.
Yeah, I love that. And they say that behind every successful man is also a successful woman, and they're doing things that help, or even now it's opposite too. Successful.
I was just going to say that opposite too.
You have a bunch of successful women, and you have a man helping her to succeed as well. So that's great. I love your energy and your passion. And how does someone determine if they're just an entrepreneur or if they're a solopreneur or if they should go that stable route?
So I think, and I preach this all over the place when I'm speaking at colleges, wherever it is, that opportunity will tell you what you were made for, what's going to happen, your destiny. Uh-huh. And when I graduated college, I got a job at an ad agency. I became an assistant buyer. While I was there, I was recruited by somebody at a radio company that said, Bill, you're good at this, but you are a natural salesman. You need to come on the other side. And they recruited me for I'd only been at the agency for less than a year. And they recruited me like crazy. They took me to dinner, to lunch, anyway, I left. I made 3 times as much money selling as I was on the ad agency side. And then one thing led to another. I always love growth. I love what's next, what's around the next corner. And then from working at the radio, it was a radio rep firm, I decided to start my own radio production company. And I built that up and I sold it to what is now NBC Universal, but at the time it was MCA Records. You never know what the next day is going to bring. You either embrace it or you shy away from it. And you'll know whether you're ready for that challenge or not. I want something stable, or I want to see what's behind curtain number 3.
Yeah. And as we conclude, just talk about your current endeavor, your Smarter Minds Network, what that is, and how people can find you and follow you. I really love this podcast, and
Thank you.
Love your energy.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed being with you and answering your questions. So everything is on my website, smartermindsnetwork.com. I have a book, Smarter Minds, which talks about everything we talked about in more depth. I speak on panels but mostly colleges and universities, and I have a consulting business. And I help young people that are starting in their careers. I help parents that are coming back to work after they've been out of the workforce for several years. I help veterans. I work very closely with veterans. And then, of course, older people in transition, either intentionally or unintentionally, because they've aged out, their companies that they work for have sold. So I work with all different groups, and I have an ongoing consulting company, and I do it virtually, just like this.
Yeah, I love that. I really enjoyed your passion, and keep up the great work, and happy holidays.
Chris, you too. It's a pleasure talking to you.